Make yourself comfortable and take a few deep breaths. It's time to clear your head. Breathe deeply and relax. Over the next 4 hours, enjoy this collection of classic fairy tales and bedtime stories inspired by Scotland's wilderness, history, and unique charm. Thank you to my patrons. You make all of these stories possible. So as always, lie back, take a nice deep breath, and welcome to Snooze with Sam. So where does one begin when you have so many old stories to choose from? From stories 2 onwards, I definitely don't know. There will be no particular order. However, if I'm considering the stories which have made you most vocal and the ones that you have shared in times gone past as being one that you value the most, there can only really be one story to kick us off with. This is Just You and the Waves. It is just you and the open beach. For mile after mile, the pebbly, sandy runway stretches onwards and onwards, arcing around the coastline like a fortress. On this grey and moody day, somewhere on coastal Moray, a gentle storm brews overhead. Yet the wind does not intrude. You are at the eye of the storm, the waves hissing and crashing elegantly on the shore parallel to you. As each wave comes in from the sea, carried by the steady breeze, it grows in height and shortens its reach, compressing into a peak of leaning potential energy before falling over itself and breaking on the sandy troughs carved by the turbulent waters. Then, 10 seconds later, another follows in its wake, and another, and another. Like clockwork, relentless, consistent, as though the swinging arm of a pendulum moves back and forth. You walk along the seafront, the elements coming at you from the east, caressing your face. The rich, salty sea spray which fills the air is heavy in your lungs, It feels like it has consistency. It feels wonderful, like you are carving your way through it as you walk. Of course, it is invigorating as any fresh air is. But there is something about being by the sea which has even more of a life-altering power about it than fresh air from inland. The sea is alive. It moves. It breathes. It has rhythm. It is a representation of nature's forces right there in front of you. It has smell. It has taste. It has texture. And it has life. The churning waters to your right send overwhelming security coursing through your entire body. As you step, one foot in front of the other, your mind is only on the sea. It is the only constant here. Only it matters. Nothing else. You are focused entirely on the rhythmical coming and going of the waves. You are humbled by its presence. Reminded that we are mere passengers in nature's world. You think to yourself, I must not worry about what I cannot control, as the waves will approach and retreat. The tides will come in and fall away. What I must do is respect and appreciate what I experience and encounter, and give all of my energy to what I can control, and waste none on what I can't. With this thought, you consciously breathe deeply, filling your lungs full of the mineral-rich coastal air. Drawing deep lungfuls of air in through your nose, you savour the feeling of the oxygen filling your body, invigorating it and awaking your senses. Your sense of touch, smell, taste, hearing and sight, each one empowered to perform just that little bit better. Steadily, with control, you exhale through your lips, letting your heart rate drop and feeling a deep relaxation take the place of the energizing sensation. As you walk, you become acutely aware of something heavy in your pocket. reaching down and feeling the outside of it. You palm the object, then moving your hand to the side, you feel another and another. Reaching into your pockets, your fingers make contact with a cold, hard, rounded and rough object. Clasping it in your hand, you draw it out of your pocket and hold it out in front of you to see. A sand-beaten stone. You came out on this walk with no burdens at all. This walk was for you to clear your head of anything you didn't need. No bag, no heavy clothing, nothing at all. This rock is weighing you down. With a smile, you pull back your arm and cast the stone high into the air towards the sea, letting the object return to the waters from which it was forged. The stone disappears from view, the weight now less in your pocket. As with the first, you reach again into your pocket and pull out another stone. Looking at it, feeling it between your fingers, and sensing the slightly different shape compared with the last, you take note of how this stone differs. With a final thought, again you throw the stone into the sea with all your might, watching it vanish into the waves, gone forever. You keep doing this over and over again, feeling the weight lessen on your body, feeling your pace quicken as your burdens are released. You didn't need to be carrying those stones with you. You knew they were there. You put them in your pocket, after all. But you forgot about them, pushed them away, until you noticed them weighing you down. You didn't need to be carrying those stones with you. You made the choice to let them go, to join the rest of the rocks, stones and boulders in the sea. This you could control. They may still be there in the sea, but they are no longer weighing you down. Onwards and onwards you walk, down the coastline, the loose pebbles and sand shifting from beneath your feet. You move quicker now, gaining pace, feeling the new spring in your step as you are cheered on by the crashing waves. The wind blows your hair, the spray from the waves moist on your cheeks. As you step, one foot in front of the other, your mind is only on the sea. It is the only constant here. Only it matters, nothing else. You are focused entirely on the rhythmical coming and going of the waves. You are humbled by its presence, reminded that we are mere passengers in nature's world. You are focused entirely on the rhythmical coming and going of the waves. This next story is based around an area called Sconser on the Isle of Skye. That was the inspiration for this little setting because there are a few fields near there that always have Highland cows in them, and it's a definite tourist hotspot. Lovely wee place. But this story's a little special because it was written and then just afterwards we found out that my best friend's papa had passed away, so this was dedicated to him upon release. This story is called Isla the Highland Cow. Wee Isla, the Highland Cow, was having an interesting morning, as far as they went. Beneath the dramatic, mountainous peaks of the West Highlands, on a nice dry day, she stood in her usual spot, just next to a rusty wrought iron gate. Already, she had seen 3 people, human beings, all having stopped their cars by the roadside to come and say hello. She didn't mind. They were all pleasant enough, after all. Even if they sometimes left their camera flashes on, which she didn't much enjoy. She preferred just to stare at them, with a blank look on her face, trying to make them think about what she was thinking about. It was a fun game for her, as they would always make funny little laughing noises as they tried their best to guess. But they would never know. Isla was always a very popular wee lady. for she was quite dainty and elegant as far as cows went. Usually very scruffy, matted and weathered, Isla was a well-kept, neat and petite-looking Highland cow. Her little ginger fringe hung loosely over her long eyelashes, the small curls dangling softly and waving in the breeze. Every now and again, a gust would lift them off her face, and she would briefly see the world free of obstruction. She loved these few seconds, but then the wind would drop again, and she'd re-enter her semi-permanent, partially curtained world. Without being uncouth, she was quite a plump little lady, as all cows tend to be, and she wore it with elegance. All the boy cows certainly adored her, and she was forever the envy of the other lassies. They couldn't be jealous or spiteful, however, as Isla was such a lovely wee cow. She was thoughtful, always put others first, and had the most delightful mannerisms, whether it be with other Highland cows or the visitors to the Highlands. Anyway, back to her interesting morning. After a few passers had been and gone, and taken a few pictures of Isla against the lush, mountainous scenery, it went quiet for a while. Not many cars passed, and no people stopped. It seemed like it would be just another lovely day in the West Highland paradise. A few hours passed before the next car stopped, but this car was a big one and full of people, more like a small bus. And on the side of this bus, it had something that read, Rabbie's Tours. But of course she didn't know, as she only spoke moo. Half a dozen people tumbled out of the bus, giggling and laughing, falling all about the place. These looked like a playful bunch. Maybe they'll be good fun. Something to liven up the day, no doubt. She moved up to her usual spot beside the rusty iron gate and popped her head over the barbed wire fence. Her hair was so thick she didn't feel anything anyway. The first couple of people clocked Isla. A tall gentleman and a shorter, younger woman, and they gasped and cheered and waved their hands to the others to come over. She was used to attention, but this bunch were simply ecstatic. Soon, the others arrived in tow, all of them now approaching the fence, palms extended to give her a wee pat. She allowed them, letting them coo away, taking pictures and laughing to each other. Some of them kept leaning on her though, which seemed friendly enough, though she certainly wasn't used to such intimacy. Isla noticed something. They were all holding small things, cups by the looks of it, and that one of the people was holding a mostly empty bottle of amber liquid. As quickly as she'd spotted them, one of the people giggled and offered their cup to Isla. She was curious, of course, and so she extended her neck for a closer look and a sniff. Whoa! This water smelled different. Good different. Like the hay and the heather she was used to eating, but much sweeter. And it stung her nose slightly, but not in an unpleasant way. Och, why not? She mooed to herself, extending her big tongue out, lapping at the cup. Oh, goodness. She liked this. It tasted fantastic. She kept licking and licking as the overly friendly people watched on, giggling and excitedly taking pictures with her. Before she could even object, her cup was being refilled with a little more. So she kept lapping, feeling even more wonderful as she went. Isla was having a great day. After a short while, the overly friendly people hopped back into their bus, bottle in hand, and continued their journey northbound. What a wonderful day they'd had so far. They got to meet a lovely Highland cow. As the bus pulled out into the open road, they all glanced backwards to wave their new friend off, hoping she was still looking out after them, perhaps waving a hoof or two. However, all they saw, to their wholesome delight, was wee Isla curled up in the grass by the rusty iron gate, deep and fast asleep in a single malt snooze. This next story, I'd be very surprised if you'd heard it before. Even I had forgotten it existed. Now that's not to say it lacks anything. It's just one of those that flew under the radar. So get ready to come with me on a little journey deep into the lush, wild forests. This story is the romantic Woodland Waterfall. Each step you take through the undergrowth leads you closer and closer to the sound of water falling from height. The snap and sharp percussive sounds of individual droplets making contact with the surface below. It's still some way off yet, but closer and closer you move, brushing shoulders with rich, lush leaves, sidestepping tree stumps and roots of all varieties, evergreens and deciduous. It's hot. The middle of summer is living up to its name. Beyond the canopy, high above, the sun looms somewhere out of sight. Such is the thickness of the leaves and needles overhead, all craning and leaning for the sky, trying to absorb as much light as they can. Every branch shuffles and competes with another. This sunshine has created a muggy atmosphere beneath the treetops, the forest floor tepid. Thick, earthy smells linger and mix with the wonderfully pleasant aromas of chlorophyll-rich leaves and plants. So close are they, you can almost taste them as you brush past. Above the rustling leaves, disturbed by hot and cold air rising and falling, the occasional coo of pigeons and chirp of forest birds ring softly through the tree trunks. They sound content, undisturbed by your presence, although you do move softly along the ground yourself. Your bare feet fall upon the leaves and needles, barely making a whispering sound. Your feet move swiftly, one in front of the other, feeling and knowing the way, following the sound of what you think is a waterfall. A light film of sweat forms on your brow at the thought of plunging into the cool water, the image tempting your body into believing it's already there, your body overheating as it realizes just how much it wants it. The sound gets clearer, and you move closer still, until, through a small gap in a faraway bush, you see a clearing in the tree line, and beyond it, the obscured movement of water. You are excited now. Your pace quickens, and you're practically throwing the obstructing branches and ferns out of the way, eager to feel the cool touch of highland water. Beneath your feet, those needles and leaves slowly turn into a mixture of small beachy pebbles and moss that's so fresh on the soles of your feet. The sunlight finds new ways through the tree canopy as the trees themselves thin out, the light striking you and glistening in your peripheral vision as you run. You make it past the shrub line, out into the open. Before you lays a stunning bowl of crystal clear fresh water, with the beautifully cascading waterfall running down the gorgeous marble rock slope, splashing and sending a fine mist into the air. The surrounding trees lean on over the pool, dangling curious branches towards the water. Everywhere you look, vibrant green moss lines the rocks, drinking in the vapour, filling the air around it. Immediately the air feels 5 degrees cooler, the moisture wicking out any residual heat. A light breeze prevails from the velocity of the waterfall striking the surface of the pool. It's completely tantalizing. Enough is enough. You want in the water. Hurriedly kicking off your clothes and shoes, throwing them to your side on a nearby rock, you dip an admittedly tentative toe into the water. You're not sure whether it's going to be freezing or warm, but to your joy, it is perfect. Somewhere in the middle. Wonderfully fresh without being paralyzingly icy. Without another thought, you rush in, plunging into the water, embracing the overwhelming freshness, feeling the water go right through you. You dive under the surface, the water so clear and blue tinged from the creamy marble underneath. You open your eyes and see a world of blissful teal calm. You are completely in paradise. Surfacing, you make your way to the waterfall, desperate to feel the water on your back and head. Holding your breath, you plunge your face in, feeling the power of the fall directly on your skin. It takes your breath away, but in the best possible way. You are invigorated instantly and refreshed, grinning at the simple pleasure of it all. Turning your back now towards the waterfall, you let it run over your shoulders as you admire the wonderful scenes of nature at its finest. There is literally nowhere you'd rather be on a day like this. Now, this next story is set in one of my favourite places I've ever been. It's so picturesque that I couldn't help but be inspired immediately to base one story off it, at least. It's a place called Balmaha on the eastern or southeastern side of Loch Lomond, and it's a very popular place, but for good reason. This is called Loch Lomond and the Rowing Boat. The charming little dinghy bobs and nods on the water as the little lapping waves carry it up and down at the jetty, where it's tied up with a thin blue rope. A little weathered and worn, the rowing boat is a pretty little thing, all teals and off-whites, cut with the aging wood underneath, where the paint has flaked off over time. Two cast iron rowlocks sit proudly on the rim of the frame, around the midpoint. They too have seen the elements, tarnished with chipping red oxide paint and actual rust patches. In the middle of this little boat rises a small bare wooden mast with a cracked layer of maritime varnish holding on for dear life. There is no sail dangling from tie cables, merely the mast itself, rising into the sky, swinging from side to side with the rhythms of the water below. It is clear that this boat was once loved, although it seems now as though it has been left for a year or two to settle in at its home at this quaint little jetty at Balmaha, a beautiful small village on the southeast banks of Loch Lomond. It is also here you sit on the jetty, with your feet hanging over the edge, dangling above the water, swinging slightly with the rhythm of the waves. Before you is the Loch itself, in all of its fame and grandeur, stretching out into open waters, where many sailing boats, jet skis, and powerboats traverse and tack in the distance, beneath the towering hills and mountains at each side. In the foreground, however, not too far from this little enclosed bay, sits a small smattering of islands, complete with their own unique wildernesses. Each has a different profile, different trees, and a different character altogether. The first one, the smallest, is fairly flat, with some other small boats moored to the shoreline, making for a second makeshift jetty in a place where space is precious, you suppose. There are no trees, only a few lone bushes amongst long grasses which wave in the wind. The second island is much larger, maybe 20 times the size, and sits further behind the first island. This island dwarfs its smaller neighbour, like David and Goliath, rising steeply out of the water, with small, jagged, rocky cliffs. The slope then lessens and turns to thick, dense heather and vibrant ferns and bracken. Above the ground are tall, exotic-looking Scots pines, with bare trunks up until about the top third, at which point the needles fluff out and fill the canopy above. It looks like a little paradise over there, perfect for camping and a little romantic getaway. Your own private island for the night. Your eyes follow around its coastline a little to a small, ancient stone pier. You guess the island once was someone's private island once upon a time. How wonderful that would be. Your own little kingdom. Yours to do whatever you wanted with. You imagine building your own little oak cabin on the far side of the island, looking out onto the waters of Loch Lomond. From the little pier you would create a small footpath, just from consistently journeying to and from the cabin, like animals do when they use a route regularly. This would preserve the purity of the island as much as possible. The dry needles beneath your feet providing ample cushioning underfoot. In front of the cabin, you would build a small balcony on stilts, reaching out over the water, so you could have little fires and sit with a book in all the peace and tranquility you desire, watching the sunlit mountains darken in the evenings as it draws in. and the sky turns all manner of oranges and pinks. Then, once darkness falls, you would stretch out beside the fire, cozy cabin waiting for you, and gaze up at the stars, admiring the Milky Way and the unpolluted skies as they give up their secrets, watching shooting stars zoom across your view. Here you would stay until the lure of your wood-burning stove in the cabin drew you inside. With a hot cocoa and the stove roaring away, you would cozy down for the night, gazing out of the window over the waters of Loch Lomond. Now here's a nice wee one for those who enjoy a spot of skiing or dream of one day taking to the slopes. You don't have to love skiing to enjoy this one though, because it's more about enjoying the environment that is snowy mountaintops. So, hope you'll enjoy this one. It's called The Sleepy Snow Mountain. Blizzard snow lashes against your delicate, rosy cheeks. The icy wind tumbles around you, biting at your skin. If it weren't for your salopettes and heavy ski jacket, you'd freeze to death. However, despite the typically ferocious winter weather of the East Cairngorm Mountains, you are mostly toasty. Yes, your face is exposed, but everything else is wrapped up in cozy clothing, keeping the cold at bay. Here in Glen, where you stand atop a mountain clutching your skis, you stare out over a sea of white and grey snow clouds. The sun is above them, obstructed from view, yet everything is so blindingly bright you need your snow goggles for protection. You look around in all directions. Foot-thick snow covers the ground. Only a few long shrubs manage to poke a branch through, indicating that there is, in fact, earth beneath this winter wonderland carpet of fresh powder. You could be at any altitude. At least, that is how it feels. Without seeing the ground, it's easy to embrace the idea of being at the top of Everest, dancing with the airliners at 35,000 feet. After having left the highest ski lift, you climbed a little higher on foot, ski boots sinking deeply into the snow, not the least bit ideal for scaling such a thick layer. You wanted to feel alone this high, however, to escape the crowds. Puffing and panting, resisting the drag from the deep powder, you trudge up and up, until finally, reaching a little fluorescent pole protruding from the ground, marking the summit, you were at the top. Even the skinny pole had managed to capture snow in its path, one whole side collecting the stray flakes. Here you stood, contemplative, soaking in the bleak yet beautiful scenery. Everything below you was now invisible, obscured by the blizzard. You found that feeling of brief, blissful isolation. A few deep breaths of ice-cold air settled your head, allowing it to cleanse and reset. Your nostrils froze with the passing sub-zero breaths, but you found it deeply invigorating. Now, having got your breath back and feeling suitably refreshed, it was time for the descent. Unshackling your skis from your backpack, you allowed them to fall into the snow in front of you, hooks preventing them from sliding downhill. So deep was the powder, they practically disappeared from view. Skiing off-piste wasn't something you'd done much of, but you felt confident at the prospect. The snow was perfect. You'll be fine, you told yourself. Kicking the residual snow from each boot, you fed each toe into their clips, then drove your heel down into the ski with a satisfying clack. You were locked in, ready to go. Suddenly you felt at home in the snow, much more so than trudging through it with just ski boots. Now you will glide and flow across the surface. Goggles down, jacket zipped up, and poles in hand, you pushed off from the summit, scanning for your route as you move. With every pass, you carved left and right, allowing your body weight to dictate your movement, keeping your weight over your toes. Your heels followed, dragging the skis across and through the powder, cutting fresh tracks in the piece. There was very little resistance, and the snow made barely a noise beneath your skis. Left and right, steadily descending, you twisted your core in your desired direction. Now, the ski lift was ahead, and you're about to rejoin the bashed pistes. You spotted a gap in the crowds, and you aim yourself through, gaining speed, reaching for the edge of your blaze, cutting a clean, arcing line through the snow. As the piste gradient flattened, you got into a rhythm. Large flowing lines, making you feel like you were flying on snow. It was difficult to imagine and know just how fast you were going, such as the nature of the blank, white environment, giving little perception of depth. But you were soaring, feeling the edge of your skis bite into the grooves beneath them. Icicles waked from your heels. Down and down you flew, free, alive, happy. There was no feeling quite like it. A combination of intense focus, burning muscles, and elative freedom. You wished this run would never end. Then again, you could always hop back on the left and do it all over again. This next story is another which takes us up to the Isle of Skye, like many. Specifically, a place called the Kerrang, which is a dramatic rock formation at the very north of the island. Now this place is a very special place for spotting something very particular. This story is called The Magical Northern Lights. Every single colour in the visible spectrum. That's what it feels like you're looking at right now. Greens turn to blues, pinks turn to reds, oranges turn to yellows, then purples, and all of them seem to dance around each other, leaping across the sky, with no sharp edges to their motion. Just pure fluidity flow and fusion. The aurora borealis phenomenon, or northern lights as it's been affectionately termed, has stirred souls for millennia. They have inspired some of the most dramatic tales in Norse mythology. The Vikings celebrated the lights, believing they were earthly manifestations of their gods. Other Norse people feared them, telling stories of the dangers they posed, and developed superstitions to protect themselves. But tonight, on this clear winter's night, perched up high, looking out over the vast Atlantic Ocean beneath a million stars, you know it only as one of the true wonders of the world. Every colour reflects subtly over the heathers, grasses, and mountains of sky. The sea quietly glistens with colour rather than moonlight. Everything you set your eyes on holds a glow of diffused richness, sourced from the wafting curtains of light in the sky. With a little fire to your side, providing you with some heat, you are sat, knees tucked up to your chest, all covered in blankets, primed and ready to dive into your cosy tent once the cold reaches a little deeper. It is a moonless night here on the Kerrang, a dramatic rock fortress of plummeting cliffs, granite towers, and treacherous scree slopes. Enormous boulders live tentatively in places they have no right to be, whilst enormous chasms cut deep into the cliff faces, suggesting some magical, mythical underworld exists within. Tall stone fingers protrude from the earth and speak of slain giants, buried under the weight of the land, reaching for one last chance of freedom. It is a place so rich with drama, it stirs the imagination. And you are sat on top of it all, many hundreds of feet above, looking down over everything. Aside from a gentle breeze and the crackle of your little fire, there is very little noise. Barking ravens have long since gone to bed, although in their place, silent, flying tawny owls make their presence known every so often. Their haunting hoots and fluttery coos echoing across the wilderness. But something else lives in the airwaves. Something rarer, needing a keener ear to pick out. Gazing up at the northern lights, you notice a faint whooshing sound, in keeping with the colours as they emerge and fade, almost like a breeze itself. You've heard people talk about the northern lights making sound, but you'd still never heard it for yourself. Every so often, a little crackle accompanies, like static. The charged particles from the solar flares colliding with the atmosphere. A perfect marriage of science and romantic fairy tale magic. You watch the colours dance and flow high above the surface of the earth, and you try to imagine what you think is above them still. Sometimes, just because of the way they move, you can picture a beautiful woman dancing in a long and elegant ball gown. Her skirts and flounce hanging and trailing near the floor line as she sweeps elegantly across the ground. But she is invisible beyond our atmosphere. Just her dress shows. Or perhaps the lights are the curtains of your bedroom. Floor to ceiling windows, opaque behind the sheer curtains, blowing gently in a breeze, giving way to a balcony in a small Italian vineyard village. Or maybe the Norse were right. Perhaps the aurora borealis is the sunlight shining off the shields of valiant warriors, or the gods sending messages from above. Whatever it is, on this night on Skye, the northern lights have lulled you into a wonderful, deep sleep, filled with magical dreams. Now for something slightly spooky, but don't worry, it won't keep you awake, promise. This is from the Scottish fairy tale series and is called The Haunting of the Kelpie. Along the still loch side, a young woman strolls, the gentle breeze blowing her long blonde hair softly whilst traversing the shallows. Dipping a toe in the water, she tests the temperature, a little too cold for her on this day perhaps. Not that she has time to swim. Just a few inches above the loch, her flowing cream dress sways and flutters in the turbulent air. A gentle mist rolls across the hills, some of it finding its way onto the water through the pine trees which borders the shore. Low-lying clouds move in and out, covering her surroundings momentarily, making it difficult to create distinction between the water and open space. Aside from the slow lulling of small breaking waves, there is no noise. The sun is covered, and only a grey overcast remains. There is a chill to the air. That morning, the young woman had helped her family to tend to their horses. They had 7 of them, all strong, working horses of various breeds. Having fed them, bathed them and scrubbed them, and allowed them some space to roam for the dawning day, she returned to the stables to settle them before continuing with her chores. But there was something not right. In the stable, she found only 6. Somehow, one of them must have escaped. A white and grey Eriskay pony. The girl fretted, terrified of telling her family what had happened, fearing it was her fault. She quickly secured the pens and stables and set off in search of her horse. The mist thickened, visibility reducing all the time. Now the woman couldn't see the far side of the loch at all. As a matter of fact, she was struggling to see much down the coast. Just the rough, heathery banks and shale beaches which lined the loch side. Scanning side to side, she called out for the missing horse, desperation getting the better of her. Her hollow voice echoed all around, finding nothing but the mist. She felt like giving up. It was hopeless in this weather. She knew the land well, but didn't want to stray too far or get lost herself. She thought about having to give her family the news of her failure. They would be so disappointed. With a trembling sigh, she turned on her heel to head back along the shore. and then froze. She dared not breathe. Eyes wide and heart pounding, such was her fright. About 100 feet away, on the shore from which she'd come, was the misty silhouette of a horse. Tall and proud, it stood, motionless, looking in her direction. She settled her nerves, subduing the fright. Where had it come from? She'd heard and seen nothing. Still, the horse remained motionless, its features a blur, colourless in the fog. Something sent a small shiver through her. Something she'd heard once as a child. She did her best to recall it. A tale, a story, a myth of creatures which roamed and haunted the seas and lochs. Kelpies, malevolent beings which often took the appearance of intriguing, beautiful horses, or lured passers-by through taking the shape of handsome young men or gorgeous, enticing women. Their only aim? To drag their victims to a watery grave and devour them. No one knows why these beings had such disdain for the human race, but stories of innocent people becoming permanently attached to a Kelpie through direct contact and being dragged into the water live on. But there are 1,000 myths. Now was not the time for her to be consumed by fairy tale. Shutting this ancient recollection out of her mind, she took a tentative step back along the shore, composing herself, so as not to spook the horse. She stepped carefully, slowly, not making any untoward sound. Still, the lapping water of the loch was ever present, but to her the sound was heightened, louder in her ears now. Something was bothering her still, a little perspiration spiking on her neck. Still the horse did not move. Closer and closer she got, feeling the crunch of the shale and slate stone beneath her buckled leather shoes. Still, the mist remained heavy, blurring the features of the horse. But she was convinced it was hers. Pale and similarly sized, her Eriskay pony stood staring at her. Still, The horse did not move. She was within 20 feet now, her heart racing, beads of sweat now on her brow, the air feeling colder and colder with every passing second. Carefully, she reached out the back of her hand, an offering of familiarity, of care, and of ease. The fog was now as thick as it had been, the ground beneath her slightly obscured. She peered through the gloom, straining to see her white and grey Eriskay pony, his piercing blue eyes looking back into hers. Still, the horse did not move. Perhaps he was nervous, maybe scared himself. She took a last step, her hand still outstretched, inching closer to his nose, desperately wanting to feel his hot breath on the back of her hand, a sign of friendship and companionship. Finally, the horse moved, slowly extending its muzzle, oddly and deliberately. The young woman nervously swallowed, still feeling that something was not right, like she was missing something. Trembling slightly, she uncurled her fingers, reached out, and placed her hand upon the horse's nose, staring into its soulless black eyes. And now for something completely different. If you're feeling a little on edge after the last story, allow me to share a tale of something fulfilling its destiny over the beautiful western highlands and islands. This little story is called The Rain Cloud. A dark shape crawls over the ground far below. It glides, it flows, and it meanders as the crow flies. It doesn't stop for any landmarks, lochs or mountains, and for hours and hours it makes haste, relentless in its pursuit of nothing much at all. High in the sky is the little rain cloud, of which this shadow belongs to. The cloud floats in space, neither pushed nor pulled, simply carried gently by a small breeze. All it has to worry about is enjoying the journey, relishing in these fine views over Scotland's western islands. It has been a hot summer in Scotland, and this little rain cloud is here to bring some much needed water to the thirsty plants and animals. Approaching the coast of the island of Mull, the little rain cloud looks down below onto the rocky cliffs, home to hundreds of thousands of seabirds. The mountainous spine reaches into the sky, nearly brushing the bottom of the cloud. Normally vibrant and very lush, the grasses and heathers look a little dry and in need of a drink. So the little rain cloud summons all its might and opens the floodgates. Droplets of water spill from the cloud, forming a great dark curtain underneath, falling to the ground. From a distance, it looks like smoke pouring from the cloud, the rain seeming to hang in space, not moving an inch. Immediately, the seabirds take to the skies and begin circling around in the downpour, revelling in the refreshing precipitation. Far below, little summer flowers, buttercups, daisies, and bluebells untense open their roots and soak up what wonderful water they can find. Almost immediately, their petals expand, looking fuller, reaching higher towards the sunlight. Quite happy, the little rain cloud turns off its taps and sets its sight further north. Across great mountains, lochs, and moorlands the cloud cruises, all alone in the sky, not rushing, not worrying about a thing. In time, the Isle of Skye falls beneath the cloud's shadow, the southernmost tip being the first to benefit. The late summer lambs jump and dance around in a field below, enjoying a little shade, but they too are thirsty. Again, summoning all its strength and energy, the little rain cloud gives everything it can and starts the downpour again. Huge droplets form, fall, and split mid-air, forming new droplets every time, the air pressure shattering them mid-flight. And then they hit the ground with a splat, soaking the earth, making huge puddles and forming little streams over the dry mud. The sheep and lambs begin to bleat and baa, overjoyed at the rain. In but a few minutes, they are content. Across the whole island, the little rain cloud soars, scattering a much-needed shower over the entire land. Every inch of earth soaking up what falls in great need. As the cloud leaves sky, it is tired and exhausted. It's spent a lot of its rain. It is only we, after all. However, in the distance, the Outer Hebrides lie. Lewis and Harris and the Uists. Vast beaches and endless horizons. Very determined, the cloud sets sail. Reaching the coast of Harris, the little rain cloud scans the sky. It is still all alone. No other clouds remain, just it and it alone. The sun is setting, the day is ending. Tomorrow, all over again, Scotland will bake in the heat. Below, streams run dry, lochs are low, and fields show signs of browning. This landscape needs the little rain cloud. So yet again, the cloud tries as hard as it can to summon what rainfall it has. And with a great heave, it releases an enormous deluge on the island. A vast waterfall descends, heavy, dark, and powerful, and when it reaches the surface, it floods the earth, drenching it in goodness, pouring all over the dried shrubs, trees and plants, and parched animals. In a little farmhouse at the corner of one particular field, this sudden downpour takes a young boy by surprise. He throws on his wellies and races outside, excited by the huge puddles. Jumping and splashing, he laughs and runs around, grinning, exhilarated by the cool rain on this otherwise hot day. And then, suddenly, the rain stops, as if turned off by a tap at the source. Silence falls, and only the trickle of travelling water remains. How strange. He looks around, confused, peering into the sky for an answer. But he doesn't find one. To his surprise, gazing up at the deep blue evening abyss, he sees nothing. Far around, in every direction, there is not a cloud in the sky. We're going right back to the beginning with this next one, to a story which encompasses everything that these stories intended to be. Peace and tranquility and losing yourself in the wilderness. This is Footsteps Through a Boggy Glen. There was something in the air which drew you outdoors today. Maybe the lifting of the bitter winter freeze allowed enough mild air to tempt you out, with the murmurings of spring now teasing. Or maybe your newfound desire to experience the wonderful nature on your doorstep lured you without any form of fight. The sheer wonderment of Scotland's scenery and endless exploration possibilities, needing no second invitation. Whatever the reason, here you are, deep in the Cairngorm Mountains, far away from any form of civilization. You rose early to be here, braving the chill at 4:30 in the morning in order to make the most of this wonderful day. You've been walking for hours and have covered at least 10 miles according to your map and calculations. You pause for a moment, an opportunity presenting itself for a breather. Looking around you, you see rich hues of earthy colours, amber remnants of bracken, the mysterious mauve, forest green and tartanesque textures of expansive heather, swallowing the hillside in an all-consuming blanket. The glen soars upwards ahead of you, showing little to no sign of whether you are near the top or not. Such is the nature of these hills. Below you, you are met with the dark crevasse of a hidden water source, a fall reverberating through the glen, issuing a steady white noise hiss. Either side of where you stand, the sides of the glen stoop as if asserting their dominance in the landscape. As much as it is beautiful, especially on a day like today, with a low-flying sun, comfortable temperature, and wispy, motionless clouds high in the stratosphere, all of which result in a wash of golden light drenching the land. You are reminded of how small you are in this vast, unrelenting wilderness. Reflecting on this thought for a moment, you feel calm, as if you've gained a little more perspective into the true matters we have as people. To stress, to worry, and to fear things which we cannot control feels, all of a sudden, totally senseless. In part, of course, it is human nature, but with a little clarity and time to think and reflect on ourselves and our environment, we can see it is of literally no benefit to do so. It is a poor use of energy and emotion. Embrace unpredictability. Embrace a little discomfort. Embrace the variety life throws your way. Once we remove ourselves from our bubble, it is amazing what we can find out about the way we live. As a little perspective goes a very long way. You make yourself a promise to worry less, to trust your instinct, and to let the small things go. And if bigger things come along, embrace them. You've got this. Relax, breathe, and trust yourself. During your thoughts, you've been walking back down through the glen. It's time to go home. You feel a lot better, drunk on fresh air. A cozy evening awaits you once you return home, and you're in no doubt you will likely fall asleep, curled up on the sofa, with your favourite music or film playing in the background. Footstep after footstep, you walk downwards through the ever-changing terrain. Winter has waterlogged large areas of mossy grass, making each step squeak and squelch. And then suddenly the ground firms, providing no give at all, and fighting back by comparison to the bog, which threatens to swallow you whole with every passing step. As the minutes go by, looking further down the glen, you spot a herd of red deer, grazing lazily, tugging at the tender roots of new season grasses. You count them all as you see them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. An even number of these majestic beasts. Among them there are 2 stags, one larger than the other, the alpha male. He is tall, dark, and broad, the depth to his fur giving away his age and experience. He stands, head up, sniffing the air. He's probably caught your scent, the prevailing wind helping you downhill. Unfazed, he walks slowly and purposefully toward the rest of the herd, towering above the petite, fair does. Here he mingles and greets, as if reacquainting with each individual, assuring their status. A true leader in every respect. Walking past the deer, you look even further toward your homeward destination, the warmth of golden light comforting you in this isolated landscape. High above, 2 buzzards dance a slow dance, circling, waltzing in a thermal. Only the occasional flap of a wing breaking the otherwise motionless affair. How elegantly they move, merely using the immeasurable potential energy of Earth's elements to soar, all the while not using much of their own reserves. Onwards and onwards you trek, feeling at one with your surroundings, and feeling at one with your mind. Gratitude floods your system at this present moment. You are thinking about everything you have and nothing you don't, focusing only on the important things and people in your life right now. You give thanks to them, knowing that they are your true wealth, not the things you're tempted to worry about that you do not have yet. With gratitude and prosperity, they will come your way. Breathe. Let your body and mind relax. You've got this. Onwards and onwards you trek, feeling at one with your surroundings, feeling at one with your mind. The setting sun beckoning you home. We're now back to the Scottish fairy tales, and perhaps one of the most famous mythical creatures ever to have existed. This, of course, is Nessie, the Loch Ness monster. Son, gonna pass me the reel. I think we're best dropping another line, the little boy's father said to him from the stern of their wooden boat. He abided, reaching into the fishing tackle box which lay to his left side, nestled in the hull. He passed the reel across, being cautious not to upset the balance of the wee dinghy on the waters of Loch Ness. Promptly, the boy's father shackled the reel to his second rod, carefully fiddled a new set of feathers and hooks to the line, attached a suitable lead weight to the end, and cast it into open water to join the other. Perched, rock steady on the forward thwart, the boy's father stared pensively out across the water, suitably clad in oilskin overalls, welly boots, and ochre beanie. The boy looked up to his father. He was his hero. For 10 years, his dad had taught him everything he knew. How to hunt, how to camp, how to forage and survive in the wild, as they were doing on this day. And, of course, how to fish. The little boat bobbed about on the water, the pair of them in agreeable silence as they waited for a bite, an unspoken father-son habit they'd adopted. A man of few words, his dad picked them carefully, making as little fuss or drama as he could. The boy respected him hugely. He was his world as he knew it. Well, this was mostly true, for there was one other companion who went everywhere with the boy. Beside him, on the centre thwart, sat his best friend, a stuffed bear called Freddy. Even at his young age, the boy had decided that a bear named Teddy would have been too obvious, so a change of first letter sufficed. Freddy was a dark brown bear about a foot tall, with big amber eyes and pale patches sewn onto his feet. Freddie and the boy had been inseparable since as long as anyone could remember. They went everywhere together, hand in hand, on whatever adventure came their way. Suddenly one of the rods jerked downwards with a great force, sending the reel upwards and across the lip of the boat. It must have been a pretty hefty fish on the line. They all got a fright, such was the disturbance of the peace previously. The boy's father lunged for the rod and reel before it could be dragged overboard, tipping the boat in the process. The boy clung to his bench, steadying himself. Realizing the second rod was unmanned though, he stretched out a hand to avoid it also risking a watery end to its service. With great, prolonged heaves, the boy's father pulled and reeled in the catch, slowly and steadily, not rushing. He knew it was a firm hook. He would tire the fish out, letting it battle. Eventually, when everything had settled, he brought the fish in with one final pull, up and over the bow. A large, healthy trout. Not as big as anticipated, but it would make a pleasing supper. Happy with their efforts, they both cleared and tidied the hull, ready to go again. But something was amiss. The boy looked puzzled. Where was Freddie? He couldn't see him anywhere. Looking all over and under their possessions, he was nowhere to be found. He must have fallen overboard during the fuss. In that moment of realization, there were no words to describe how sad the boy felt as he struggled to keep back the tears. He was absolutely devastated. His father looked towards him, aching himself as he felt his boy's pain. There was nothing he could do for him. Don't worry, son. It'll be all right, I promise, he said optimistically, knowing that deep down he knew the bear was gone. He searched for some hope, some attempt of a situational reconciliation. Have I ever told you about the story of the Loch Ness monster? The boy shrugged, eyes damp. He shook his head. Well, son, his father said, breaking his usual trend of few words. Let me tell you about our Nessie. And they both sat in their little boat, the boy slowly but surely enthralled by the story of the Loch Ness Monster. His father told him of reports of a monster inhabiting Loch Ness, dating back to ancient times. Notably, local stone carvings by the Picts depicted a mysterious beast with flippers. The first written account appeared in a biography of Saint Columba from the year 565 AD. According to that work, the monster bit a swimmer and was prepared to attack another man when Columba intervened, ordering the beast to go back. It obeyed, and over the centuries, only occasional sightings were reported. Many of these alleged encounters seemed inspired by Scottish folklore, which abounded with mythical water creatures. In the year 1933, the Loch Ness Monster's legend began to grow. Over time, some people claimed to have seen an enormous animal, which they compared to a dragon or prehistoric monster. And after it crossed their car's path, it disappeared into the water. As a result, the Loch Ness area attracted numerous monster hunters, and over the years, several sonar explorations were undertaken to locate the creature, but none were successful. In addition, numerous photographs allegedly showed the beast. However, most were discredited as fakes or as depicting other animals or objects. The boy sat cross-legged, eyes wide and mouth slightly open, as he hung on every word of the story. However, son, something still tells me that this beast exists in these parts. I can just feel it, the boy's father said, with a wry smile and twinkle in his eye. And I believe Nessie is a good creature, not evil. Not all monsters have to be bad. The boy liked that thought, and he liked the story. It took his mind off having lost Freddy for good, though he was still deeply upset about the whole matter. Another sudden movement interrupted his thoughts. The rod. It moved again, but this time less so. As before, His father reached for it before it could be dragged overboard and started reeling. On the other side of the boat, something caught the boy's eye. Something drifting in the water. He couldn't believe it. Surely not. It was Freddy. He almost leapt out of his seat, unsteadying the boat in the process. Reaching down into the water, he grasped the soggy bear from the loch, shaking the worst of the water from his fur. Overcome with joy and grinning from ear to ear, he cast his eyes upwards once more to the water, just in time to see the arcing back of a great beast disappear below the surface of Loch Ness. His eyes widened, his mouth dried. He thought about calling his dad, reaching out for him to look. But he left him be, wrestling the fish. Instead, the little boy just hugged Freddy tight, whilst looking out over the few ripples that Nessie left in their wake. As many of you know, this next one is rather special to me because it was written for someone very special. Not only that, it's also a favourite of many of you, as you've told me over the years. Another early one, based on a trip that I took with this person when I met them, in a place called Loch, the geographical epicentre of the country. It's truly remote and very, very romantic. So this is Sunset Rain on the Roof. All tucked up in the back of your car, you gaze out over the loch. The boot lid is open, allowing an unobstructed panorama of your view. The most incredible display of sunset colours you've ever experienced, all coupled with the most serene and spiritual surroundings of Loch. After a long day's walk, you're settling down for the night, having already put up your tent outside. The weather was gorgeous, a sunny and still day. A few moments ago, some isolated rain clouds drifted overhead and began sprinkling delicate droplets of rain, creating a wonderful smell of wet earth so difficult to describe, yet so seductive. You hopped into the back of your car where your bedding still sat. A perfect little nest, just until the rain passed. Feet outstretched in front of you, towards the open boot lid of your car. You are stunned by what you see. The rain pitter-pattering on the roof, as the clouds float gently across the sky. The sun reappears, low on the horizon, and turns your whole world a myriad of golden and pink shimmers and glows. Every single raindrop turns into a falling crystal, seemingly hanging still in midair as the sun penetrates them with a radiant backlight. Before you hangs a curtain of water droplets, slowly descending to the surface of the loch below, creating all sorts of sun rays, trying to force their way through. Behind this curtain lies the dramatic hills of Kinloch, a small and quaint village situated at the east end of the loch. These hills create a fortress on either side of the loch's edge, channeling all light up and down it like a water runway. The surface of the loch shimmers like nothing you've seen, with such magical light to play with. Every droplet's ripples clash with a neighbouring set, and another, and another. The distorted surface catches every colour under the sky. Deep greys from the clouds, flashes of blue from the sky above, and the reddy oranges, pinks, and rich golden hues from the setting sun in the west, hanging just over the loch's surface now. Every few moments you close your eyes, just listening to the percussive sounds of the rain hitting the car's roof. It's a softer sound than the rain landing on a road or in puddles. It's the perfect sound to send you to sleep, should you choose to. Merely thinking of that makes you snuggle into your duvets and blankets even more, getting cozier and warmer by the minute. Opening your eyes, you notice the sun has lowered in the sky just that little bit more, turning every colour you see just that little bit darker. The oranges and reds of the sun-struck clouds deepen. The greys darken, and the blue sky turns a little inkier as the evening begins to turn to night. Still, you focus on the falling water droplets, admiring how slowly they move, especially in the distance, where they don't seem to move at all. Everything around you is drenched in golden light. The surrounding hills, your tent on the water's edge, the pebbles on the shore, and the grasses of the beach and the inside of your car. The lip of the open boot is spattered with broken water droplets. There is little breeze, so the rain mostly passes by, leaving you untouched on the inside of your car. As you shuffle a little, getting slightly comfier, you note how much this feels like a dream to you. Like this isn't real. Your view is ethereal, like a painting, not like real life. These colours and these landscapes seem to only exist in fiction, yet here you are, feeling dozy in the back of your car, cocooned in lovely warm bedding, peering out over Loch as the setting sun illuminates your entire world. You watch the rain, every droplet landing on the water's surface. It is quite hypnotic, the slow-moving panorama before you. The following story is another borrowed from a very real place. Near the Cairngorm Mountains, in central Scotland also, is the River Tummel. It follows the A9 road north to south through the spine of the country and is host to some of the most phenomenal forestry I've ever seen. Especially in autumn, the colours there are beyond belief, and it epitomises picturesque pine Scotland. The river is beautiful also, and in general the area inspired me to write this. This is At One with Nature by the remote River Tummel. There is nothing quite like drawing in lungfuls of the cleanest crisp air whilst surrounded by nature at its fullest. Pure isolation of the best kind, somewhere in the geographical centre of Scotland. Around you are the densest coniferous trees, absorbing all light that enters, at least from where you are standing. Taking a few timid steps toward the tree line, you break the boundary from light to dark. Inside the woodland, the exposure and contrast changes as your eyes adjust to the gloom. and, to your surprise, the world around you seems to change entirely, from a dark, dingy abyss to a rich, green and golden paradise of mosses, ferns, dropped needles, and space. The trunks of these trees spaced evenly apart, allowing a gap to wander in and around. Opening up your arms, you zigzag and slalom between the endless tall pines, gazing up into the canopy. Underneath your feet lies a cushion of vegetation so thick and cosseting you make hardly a noise as you move. Just the soft clicks and cracks of small twigs and the rustle of pine needles. It's beautiful. The light source from above is broken, scattered, and punctuated by the converging treetops. But occasionally, one tree reaches tall enough to bask in the diffused glow of the sun, resultantly casting much of that golden light down to the forest floor below. The smell of this place is simply intoxicating. How can the air feel and taste so intense, yet so clean? The oily pine needles, the natural resins, wood, mulch, earth, foliage, moisture, all of these adding up to create some tantalizing cocktail of aromas and textures. It is almost oppressive, but it is perfectly invigorating. It makes you ponder the fact that this beautifully scented, oxygen-charged air quality is maybe the real therapy we all truly need. Occasionally, you hear the squawks and screeches of buzzards, either perched in trees or circling above the canopy somewhere. It's hard to tell. Their presence is comforting, and even though you are seemingly alone, the reality is anything but. The company of nature's truest and rightful occupants is a joyous thing to feel. You feel honoured to be a guest among their lands. Aiming for a gap in the trees far ahead, you step carefully over the scatterings of forest debris, reluctant to disturb it. You feel as though a human footstep left behind almost spoils the untouched lie of the land, so tread carefully, you do. The nearer you get, you start to make out a picture beyond the trunks. You see moving water, rounded boulders, and a gentle haze. You draw closer and closer, feeling an almost supernatural pull into the light, like there is an energy willing you to return to the open space, away from the shelter. You break through, squinting as the brightness of the open sky overwhelms your retinas. As you readjust your sight, you step forward across the threshold of woodland to fist-sized pebbles, to larger boulders. Stepping up onto an enormous boulder jutting out over the water, you walk towards the lip of this smooth, primer grey runway on the banks of the river. Gazing across the water to the opposite bank, you feel a wave of emotion overcome you like a tide. A cool and persistent, moisture-rich breeze brushes your face, invigorating you as the water rushes past below you. Glancing upstream, you regard the scattering of dead trees caught on rocks, having flowed downstream up until that point. They jut from the water like natural sculptures. This change of physical sensations may seem subtle, but their combination is moving. Perched in the open air, exposed and vulnerable, you feel alive. Holding your hands out either side of you, you take a big, deep breath. You hold it for a moment, allowing your thoughts, feelings, and emotions to blossom and do what they may. Reveling in this moment, willing not to let it go. You exhale your breath as tears run down your cheeks. The breeze catches the moisture on your face, sending a slight chill through your body. You didn't know how much it meant to you to be a part of your natural surroundings. In a world full of artificial thrills, we have forgotten how powerful our natural world can be all on its own. You promise to embrace the world that we live in, living your life with the deepest respect for all flora and fauna. You take a seat on the edge of the rock, letting your feet dangle above the crisp, bubbling blue water below. Your view is all greens, greys, blues and golden browns. You feel relaxed. You feel calm. You feel honoured to be a guest among these lands. This story tells the tale of how the Vikings came to influence Scotland's history forever. Scotland played an important role in Viking raiding, trading, and colonisation. And the Vikings played an important role in the history and national identity of Scotland. While several references in surviving sagas and other Norse lore strongly state that Scotland was best avoided, many Vikings obviously ignored the advice. It was said to be a land of fierce savages and abominable weather. Well, nothing's changed there. In addition to the rich supply of archaeological evidence, Scotland boasts some of the highest Nordic DNA outside of Scandinavia, and shares many cultural similarities with Norway. Within a relatively short period of time, in the early 9th century, Vikings had taken enough territory in Scotland to form their own kingdom there, called Lochland or Lochline, which, at its height, extended influence from Dublin to York. For the natives of Scotland, it was not just the active influences of this Norse presence, but also their reactions towards it that forged many disparate tribes into one people. Why did the Vikings even go to Scotland in the first place. The motive for Viking conquest and colonisation in Scotland is immediately apparent upon studying any world map. In the Viking Age, roughly 793 to 1066, much of the energy of Scandinavia was focused outward. The Norse realised that through daring and the use of their technologically advanced dragon ships, they could gain far more wealth and land than they could ever expect to gain at home. Sailing out from Norway, Denmark, and Sweden towards the rich monasteries, fertile fields, and abundant resources of Ireland and Britain, the archipelago of islands that form the west of Scotland would make perfect base camps for armies to amass and trading posts to flourish. Clearly at that point, nobody had told them about the rain. I wouldn't want to be an amassing army when your hair's getting blown about by a big hoolie. These 790 Scottish islands, including those of Orkney, Man, Skye, Shetland, and the Hebrides, are also perfectly situated to receive goods and also retreating forces back from Ireland and Britain, as well as Iceland and lands further west, in fact. The fjords and hills of these windswept havens even looked a little like the homelands the Norse had left behind. That's not really surprising given it's just over the road. Meanwhile, the natives of these islands, while certainly brave and hardy people, if I do say so myself, they could rarely have possessed the military organisation to resist Vikings that landed in any significant number. This is saying it mildly, I'd say. I think the best that we could manage was maybe a spade or a pitchfork, definitely in place of a sword, but I don't know, maybe they'd have even had to resort to tossing haggis or tatties or trebucheting sheep or something, I don't know. I digress, as usual. Western Scotland, therefore, offered what we could call the Viking dream. In the pioneer days of the early 9th century, someone who owned a few ships could possibly win themselves their own island and the freedom to pursue their ambitions as far as their fate would take them. The mainland of Scotland was another story, though. Centuries before, a few failed campaigns had taught the Romans, even at the height of their imperial strength, that it was better to build a wall to keep the natives of Scotland out rather than to try and conquer them. They knew and learned all too wisely. We're not so easily stepped on. The Romans even had to pull back from their Antonine Wall and build the better Hadrian's Wall further south. If you are interested, both remnants of the walls do still exist. The Antonine Wall is definitely not too far from Glasgow. It was built across the central belt, and to be fair, Hadrian's Wall in the north of England is also pretty spectacular. There's probably never been a wall built since it. It's almost deeper than it is tall. Should you ever get the chance, I would recommend going and have a look. The Saxons had fared no better, and so their dominion stopped in Northumbria. By the time the Vikings came on the scene, what is now Scotland as we know it was a patchwork of competing kingdoms, and each of these kingdoms was a patchwork of competing tribes and clans. These diverse tribes fell into two basic categories: the Picts and the Scots. The Picts were the Aboriginal peoples of Scotland, especially the north, including the Highlands and the east. Allegedly, the Romans had called them Picti, from the Latin word for paint, referring to their tendency to run into battle naked and painted blue. That sounds like a normal night out in Glasgow, if I'm honest with you. Just replace the word battle with clubs, bars, or Sauchiehall Street. In the intervening several hundred years, they had perhaps become more sophisticated, but were still very frightening. The Scots were Gaelic people that most experts believe had migrated into Scotland from Ireland. The Romans referred to Irish raiders in Britain as Scotai or Scotti, and the 9th century Scottish kingdom Dalriata stretched from western Scotland to northern Ireland. This added weight to the Irish origins theory. The Picts and the Scots were constantly at war with each other, as well as some of the tribes of Britons in the region, and of course the Saxons of neighbouring Northumbria. Religion was one of the few areas where most parties actually agreed. It's very novel, if only the same could be said today. And so monasteries, such as the famous abbey in Iona, thrived despite the discord throughout the rest of the land. And should you ever get the chance to visit Iona, I would truly make it a priority. If you want to know, these days, as close as possible, the reality to how people lived 200 years ago, this tiny little island is about as remote as you can feel, even on the west coast. I know I recommend everywhere, but, why wouldn't you? This all was, as we have seen in Ireland, the natural habitat in which Vikings became apex predators. The Vikings took advantage of the war and strife bubbling between native tribes, and while the Picts and Scots fought each other, the Vikings robbed the monasteries of gold and snatched more and more territory. Within about 50 years of the first Viking raids, there was enough Norse strength in mainland Scotland to threaten the existing powers there. That threat, however, had an outcome that no one, especially not the Vikings, could have anticipated. So this is how the Vikings inadvertently created Scotland. In the year 839, King Alapin of the Dalriata Scots met a confederation of several Pictish kings in battle. Alapin's Scots were routed, and the king was killed. As the Picts impaled the hapless ruler's severed head on one of their spears, however, a large force of Vikings broke from cover and rushed them. It is not really known why the Vikings were there in such force, but it is likely that they were waiting to take further advantage of the turmoil, to weaken the native resistance to their expansion. The Vikings smashed the Picts, scattering their army and killing their kings. Alpin's son, Cana, remembered to history as Kenneth MacAlpin, took his father's place as king of the Dalriata. Taking advantage of the power vacuum the Vikings had just created amongst the Picts, Kenneth, who may have been half-Pict himself, began successfully taking over Pictish kingdoms. By 848, Kenneth MacAlpin was being called the King of the Picts and the Scots. This unification of Picts and Scots, however incomplete it may have been, did not come a moment too soon. For a massive Viking fleet of 140 ships descended upon the Scots kingdom of Dalriata. the Scots were able to retreat east into Pictish territory, where they were now more welcome, depriving the Vikings of total victory and further unifying Kenneth MacAlpin's kingdom. On yourself, Kenny. Good lad. Soon, people did not speak of Dalriata and Pictland anymore, but called the whole region Alpa. While various political changes throughout the next few centuries led to the country being called Scotland, it is still called Alpa in the native Scottish Gaelic language today. While it would take many, many years and many wars and even more great leaders to turn a land of warring tribes into one nation, it was, in fact, the Vikings that catalyzed this change. Rewinding to the beginning of Scotland's Viking period. As mentioned, the Outer Hebrides and the northern Inner Hebrides were predominantly Pictish, whereas the southern Inner Hebrides formed part of the Gaelic kingdom of Dalriata. Both of these areas were affected by Norse activity. The Abbey at Iona, a beacon of Christianity in the British Isles, was sacked by Vikings in 802 and 806, prompting its monks to conceal or send away most of its treasures. But, as well as stealing, the Vikings would go on to lay down roots here. An 11th century cross, a slab decorated with Irish and Viking art, was actually found on Isla, the island of Isla, in 1838. A rather fascinating sight on Skye also demonstrates this interesting parallel between the Viking occupation and Norse settlement. Ruaba and Duanan today an uninhabited peninsula to the south of the Coolin Hills on Skye, contains the small Loch, which is connected to the sea by a short artificial canal referred to as the Viking Canal. This loch was an important site for maritime activity for many centuries, and it is thought that some of its features, including the stone-built quay, the system to maintain constant water levels, and a 12th century boat timbers, were built by Norsemen. Although this has come into question recently, actually. The canal may have been used to launch raids, as well as connecting Skye to the rest of the Kingdom of the Isles. By 1156, however, much later, the territories did eventually divide and split so that the Outer Hebrides remained under Norwegian control, whilst the Inner Hebrides broke away under Norse Celtic leadership. So what about the Vikings in Scotland? Though the Vikings established supremacy in the Western Islands and ended the Scottish kingdom of Dal Riata, the emergence of a more unified Alpa changed their designs. Conquering the land no longer seemed possible, and so, as they had in Ireland, the Norse began to become more intertwined in the ethnic, cultural and political landscapes. For example, the most successful Scottish ruler of the Dark Ages, Constantine MacEad, or Constantine II, crushed a Viking offensive led by Dublin's Ivar the Younger in 902, only to surround himself with Viking allies against King Aethelstan of England some decades later. Common cause and joint interest became more important than ethnicity, and Norse, Scots, Picts and Britons intermarried in Scotland on all levels of society. Eventually, it was not only the Picts and the Scots that were Scottish, but the Vikings too. Once more, the islands were different, and remained a bastion of Viking activity and Norse customs long after the Viking Age ended. It was to islands like Orkney, the Shetlands, and the Isle of Man that the Irish king Mair Morda drew many of his allies against Brian Boru in the Battle of Clontarf in the year 1014. And it was back to these islands that the Viking survivors returned. The Hebrides were official territories of Norway and not Scotland until the 13th century, as was Orkney and Shetland until the 15th. Today, these places are still as rich in Norse culture as they are in Norse blood. DNA studies show that the Shetland Islands are still about 45% Norse, and Orkney is 30%. And they offer firm evidence that these areas of Scotland were settled by Scandinavian families, and not just male adventurers. Other islands, like the Hebrides, are around 10 to 15%, maybe a little more, which is still very high, considering that we are now talking about migration that occurred thousands of years ago. In recent years, as Scotland began to consider independence from the United Kingdom, ideas about Scandinavian roots and identity gained renewed some attention in that area. In 2014, the people of Scotland voted to stay in the UK, deciding by a narrow margin that their shared history and culture with their neighbours was more important than their differences. Most Scots would probably agree. Maybe not so much in the cities of Glasgow. Very patriotic people here. However, that kinship with England or Norway defines Scots far less than our own unique identity. Scots, Picts, and Norse all helped shape the national character of Scotland. And the Viking legacy can be seen clearly in the many Scottish contributions to the world since that time. Finally, we have the two Faeries stories, part 1 and part 2, from the Scottish fairy tale series. Based on the mythical fairies and the lands in which they are known to inhabit. This takes us to another part of the Western Highlands, like many, near a place called Ellandonan Castle, and journeying on to Skye to a place called the Fairy Glen, named for good reason. This is Faeries Part 1 and Part 2. At first she heard the faint sound of a crackling fire. It seemed distant, but got clearer over time. Then came some muffled waves and whispering wind. Once she realized she was stirring from a deep sleep. Her surroundings started to come to her again. Slowly opening her eyes. A blurry scan of the room revealed her whereabouts. The most magnificent bedroom, fit for a queen. An enormous 4-poster bed, floor-to-ceiling French doors opening out onto a balcony, purple and gold lace curtains falling to the floor, marble everything, polished mahogany floorboards, chaise longue, a healthy open fire in the corner of the room, and of course, the antique dressing table on which she was perched, pin-cushioned for comfort. It was dawn, and the early morning chorus of birds was in full force over the airwaves. Through the pane windows and French doors, the sky was beginning to turn back to inky blue from the obsidian black before it. And then she noticed something she'd almost forgotten. Beneath the bedsheets lay a person. A human being. The quilts rose and fell, slowly. They remained deeply asleep, just as the little fairy left them the night before. That evening before, she had guided them into and through the castle in which they slept. The castle of Ellandonan, not far from the Isle of Skye. They had seemed like they needed a place to stay, so she did her best to help them to a safe bed without being too obvious about it. But even the little fairy knew she couldn't completely hide herself. Her wee dusky purple glow followed her every move. This was useful to help guide the human, of course. As it was now morning, the little fairy needed to return to her people. But they were a long way away, nestled in the Fairy Glen, near the village of Uig on the island. The Fairy Glen was a wonderful and magical place. She'd have to set off soon, so as to get home before the end of the day. She picked herself up, brushed herself down, and gave the human a little wave, even though they were completely unaware of her. She'd grown fond of the human in their brief meeting. The fairy aimed for the bedroom doorway and took to the wing. Darting between bushes, ditches, and hedgerows, she flew cautiously, following the coastline of mainland Scotland. The little fairy was quite a quick flyer, not hesitating, making committed decisions to her route. The weather was fair today, only a gentle breeze and resulting lapping waves broke the silence. Every now and again, she found herself on the safe flight path alongside birds and insects. The birds never bothered her, and she did not bother them. They had perception for each other. But it was always the bumblebees which seemed to find themselves in head-on races of chicken with her. As lovely and harmless as they were clumsy and posed a rather fuzzy hazard. She kept her pace above theirs in order to keep a distance where possible. Onwards she flew until she reached one of the most dangerous parts of her journey, the crossing to Skye. Here she had to brave the elements of the open water. Hugging the Skye Bridge closely, she took a deep breath and raced as fast as she could through the air to safety, the wind picking up and throwing her around. However, she maintained course, set her sights on the shore, and powered her way across this famous crossing. Cars and heavy vehicles thundered over the bridge above her head, causing the whole structure to thud and vibrate. The echo of tire roll rattling around under the arches. With one final beat of her delicate wings, she made it, finding cover in the tall trees. She was out of breath, the poor thing. She'd already flown about half the distance to the Fairy Glen, but there was more to do, further to go. With the sun high in the sky, though, unobstructed by the clouds, she was particularly visible. But she had to keep going. A mixture of nerves, anticipation, and excitement filled her at the thought of going home. There was one thing on her mind, though. She knew her biggest challenge was yet to come. Between her and the fairy glen were the Glen Mountains, a great fortress of black and red lime and granite, rising steeply into the sky, thousands of feet in the air. With another deep breath, she set off. Glen Mountains in the distance. How was it that one moment the weather could be fair and favourable, yet the next would crescendo into an almighty storm? This is what the wee fairy had encountered next. Gale force winds, torrential rain, and crackling thunder some way off in the distance. It had been 3 hours since she'd made the crossing to Skye. One foolish part of her believed the hardest part of her journey was over, but the counterside to her optimism was the harsh reality of this wild island, often named the Misty Isle. Huddled under a large rhododendron bush, the little fairy waited for some of the worst rain to pass. She was soaked to her skin, her tiny purple dress sodden with rain. The vibrant pink and purple flowers gave her some camouflage, making her lilac glow disappear to the unassuming eye. Each thunder boom racked her with nerves. Where she was going, the last thing she needed was to be battling with lightning. From beneath a leaf, she peered out into the gloomy, glum afternoon dreich. Speeding wind ruffling her long blonde hair. There was a break in the rain. She could see it. One huge black cloud passed overhead. Another incoming threatened to strike within 20 minutes. Glancing up to her left, she regarded the might of the Glen mountain range, Ben Blavan looming above, the summit disappearing into the boiling clouds. Now was the time. Gritting her teeth and fire in her eyes, she left the shelter of the rhododendron bush and flew out into the darkness. Just when she thought the wind and rain had peaked in ferocity, it grew exponentially. darting from rock to rock on the 45-degree slopes. She was battered by the storm. Rain slashed against her delicate face. The wind tore at her little purple dress, and clattering thunder and lightning frightened her to her very core. The whole lot was happening right above her head, dancing with the summit geology. That was where she was going. She needed to reach the ridge, traversing every sequential black coulee until she was clear of the range. Reaching the top of the mountain, she sought brief shelter behind a cairn, composing herself, thousands of feet in the air. The wee fairy was distressed and full of panic. She'd not flown in such a storm before now. Maybe she should have waited at ground level for longer. She was here now, and she was hell-bent on getting back to her home, the fairy Glen. She pressed on. It was like something out of a nightmare. A lightless, alien landscape, save for the frequent flashes of deafening lightning which illuminated the whole ridge like a ghastly, gnarled set of teeth. Rain poured off the rocks, the wind picking it up and churning it around again for good measure. If there was any greenery up here, she couldn't see it. It was a barren, monochrome landscape. She couldn't see the ground for the rain and clouds, but the mountains sloped off violently either side of her into the abyss. Onwards she pushed, eyes focused on the next rock and the next. Small waypoints were her only hope here. She picked them off one by one. Sometimes the ground fell away, then climbed steeply again. She must be making progress over each peak. She counted in her head as she went. Ben Blavan, Sgwr Alistair, Sgwr Jerak, Bruach the Freya. Occasionally she made a wrong turn, sending herself down great gullies of scree, the wind channeled like a venturi tube. She kept going and going, exhausted, depleted, but as determined as ever. The ground beneath her wings began to descend again. However, this time, it kept on going. At ground level, the world around her changed entirely all over again. She had made it. Over the following hours, the wee fairy soared high through the treetops of Sky's spine, drying off beneath a clearing sky. The wind fell away again to a steady breeze, and against all probability, the sun peered out from behind the clouds, radiating heat and injecting new life into her. She allowed herself a little smile. Excitement filled her once again at the prospect of returning home. Cresting the final hill, just south of Uig, she was not disappointed by what she saw. Below her were great spiralling turrets of stone and moss, beautiful twisting rock patterns cast across the earth at the base of the glens. The wee fairy paused, looking out across the fairy glen. There was a presence hanging in the air. She could feel it. She always did when she came home. One by one, she saw little colourful glows appearing from seemingly nowhere. From behind rocks, shrubs, and from within the towers themselves. At first, a dozen, and then 100, then 1,000. Like a blossoming Christmas tree scattered with fairy lights. She was home, and these were her people. The fairy glen was truly like something out of a fairy tale. Thank you for listening this far, and as a wee token of my gratitude, I'd like to thank you personally for helping to make Snooze with Sam what it is today. We as a community are still young and have a very prosperous future ahead. This was a collection of old stories, retold, many of which may have eluded your ears until now. I wanted to bring a few of them back to life and give them an energy which they may have previously lacked, and another moment of limelight which they may have missed. On a personal note, having read through excuse me, I can't escape the yawns. Yeah, having read through so many of them again, I can confidently say that a few of my personal favourites were the Northern Lights, Nessie, and the Boggy Glen story. They seemed completely inconspicuous, especially the latter, and I had all but forgotten about them, to be honest. Excuse me, I'm tired. But yeah, they were good writing, with lovely messages through them. It's just something I wanted to share with you, because it's wee stories like these which are a nice reminder of one of many reasons why I do this. But obviously, the most important reason is for you, to help you find sleep in a world where you may have struggled before. Anyway, I will let you sleep now. Thank you for your support, and kindness, and time. Should you ever feel like making that extra bit of difference, you can do so on Patreon, as you know, or my soon-to-be-present, hopefully, buy a coffee donation button, because it does make a huge difference. Thank you, and sleep well.